With Reb Zalman, founder of Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal. This event was recorded March 9th, 1995 at the 92nd Street Y in New York City. I'm Kay Abrahams of Peneor, New York. Shalom.
Wonderful.
I can't rest in situations like that.
He's going to introduce you.
And now you can sing it along. Na 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 I think we are ready to get started.
Thank you so much for your patience this evening. I'm Steve Siegel, the director of the library at the Laureate, and I'm delighted to see all of you here for the third in our series, The Power of the Jewish Story. This is one of many programs we've had this season. We have one more program coming up in early May when Pamina Schramm will tell an evening of stories. At this point, I'm going to let Jerry Fierce do the actual introduction of our guest this evening.
I'd like to introduce Reb Zalman by not telling of his many wonderful acts and his wonderful accomplishments, but just speaking about his light. Because that's the impression that I had when I first met him, of his light. And then tonight I heard that at one time he was a diamond cutter. And so I understood, because you see, the thing about him is that a person leads a life, and in his case that life went from Poland to Vienna to Brussels to the United States, and you are all of those layers. All of those facets are carved into you, and your light shines through them. And each of those little facets is a story. And each of them break down into more facets and more stories. And when you are as filled with understanding and experiences with light, why all of those facets glow. And so tonight, I am so pleased to be able to have been a part of making this evening possible, and to being able to share some of your light. Thank you.
You know, sometimes I get introductions as a person, and tonight we had an introduction into the theme. Watch the art with which we were taken into the realm of story. A person, a story, a life story, a fact, diamond cutter, you know, just like this, all of a sudden, hey, you look at the story differently, you know. There are dimensions of question and amazement and wonder that are being tickled out as someone begins to tell a story. Because in a way, before I get into the topic itself, I want to tell you why I sang the melody I sang before. Reb Shlomo, my buddy, used to daven with that melody, Reb Shlomo Karlebach. And I'd like to dedicate this evening to his memory. People know him as a singer, but what a storyteller. What a storyteller. The way in which the thing came alive before our eyes. He took us into, I want to make a pun, virtuous reality. Like moving us into a place in which we felt that the ideal, the virtue, is more reality than what we see with our eyes. It's an art form, a spiritual art form to tell stories. And whether or not we label it as this, if you get into the feeling that you feel at this moment, and you ask yourself, look, do you feel the harmony in this room? Do you feel the expectation? I have a sense we're davening, We aren't even naming it that way. So do you see what I mean by speaking of it as a spiritual art form? Because a lot of religion has been shown as discipline, as the hard stuff, And if you want to do it right, the only way to do it right is to do it right, grim. Yeah. And when you get a whole other situation coming with the Baal Shem Tov, which was saying to people, Judaism isn't a burden, it's the way to pamper your soul. That's what you do with it. You pamper your soul. So storytelling, singing nigunim, were ways in which people did that. Now, how could you imagine a scene in which people did that? They didn't sit like you are sitting here. A rough table, glazele with schnapps around, people singing a melody, outside is cold and the wind is blowing, but a big pot-bellied stove is making it warm there, and they're hanging around, and this guy with a pipe in his mouth, and the other one with a glazele, and they schmooze, and I want to tell you from my Rebbe. And they would do a can you top this, Have you ever seen a tzaddik, such a tzaddik like he? Remember the wonderful story of Peretzes, when they all say, where does the Rebbe go at midnight? And so this Litva comes and follows him and finds him cutting wood and bringing it to that old sick woman. And what does he say afterwards? If not higher. So you had that sense of, can you top this? My Rebbe's in heaven. And this guy says, my Rebbe the woodcutter, if not higher. So there was a sense in which people wanted to take the experience and raise the ceiling, as it were, and to put their mind into higher regions. In such settings, the miraculous order of being was invited. Many of the tales that were told were wonder tales. Oh, what the Rebbe had getan. And he sat in the wagon, and he had this great intention and said that holy name, and before long they had come all the way from Krakow to Lemberg, and in a half hour with the name of the jumping of the road. So they would sit around and tell the story, and very often it would have a virtue to praise, steadfastness and trust in God, I want to tell you a story about this man who owed the poets the money, and the last day came and he didn't have any money. And people said to him, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to go and pay. So they said to him, what do you mean you got to go and pay? You haven't got yet. He says, I don't know, God will provide, you know. And as he walks, he meets a guy who does a deal with him and gives him a down payment so he can pay the poets, you know. That's what I call faith. You get the sense of how people would talk about these things. And when they didn't live up to that faith, how did the story go? It happened one terrible time, was close to a famine, and they made a fast day in Abt. And they said everybody has to fast, to pray for rain and to make sure that God will have mercy and forgive our sins and give us rain. And the rabbi of Abt, he didn't think so much of fast days. So in the afternoon, when you go to the special mincha service, at which time you read the Torah, and he comes by the rabbi's house who sits and eats a turkey. Oh, Rebbe, how could you do such a thing? On a fast day, he says, you asked me, I told you, I don't believe in fast days. What do you show to God with a fast day? You can go without eating. I have to show him I can't serve him without eating. They get it. So, Rebbe, will you come to the shul anyway and help us with the daven? He says, no. He says, why not? I looked out of the window, and you are all going to pray for rain. Not one of you came with an umbrella. So you get the sense, where's your faith? Where's your faith? And so that element of enhancing the virtues, of enhancing faith, of giving people direction, and of shifting mind. Reb Shneir Zalman is sitting with some of his friends yet years before he became a Rebbe, in the home of the one who served as the Rebbe at that time, Reb Mendele Horodoka, who was away on a journey. And as they're sitting around the table doing what Hasidim do with the storytelling and with the studying together, a man comes in with great geschrei, Rebbe, please, my son is sick, and they say, the Rebbe isn't here. Says, if the Rebbe isn't here, then you pray. And they were saying to each other, how do we get to be like the Rebbe? The Rebbe prays, it's a prayer. Reb Shneir Zalman says, no. Once upon a time, there was a king. He had many children. They were always squabbling. He couldn't stand it when he had admitted him to his presence. This one said, I need this, and the other one says, don't give him, and they would cry, and they would make tumult, and the king couldn't handle it. So he got a mayordomo to take care of the kids. And every time it happened that they needed something, they went to the mayordomo, who talked to the king, and that's how the kids got what they needed. Once it happened that the mayordomo was away. And one of the young princelings fell and hurt himself and was bleeding. And all of a sudden, all the children came together to pick up the one who was bleeding and were helping him. And they said, let's go to Papa right away. And somebody said, how could you go to Papa? The mayordomo isn't here. And they said, we only need the mayordomo when we squabble. When we agree, we can do it together. Get that sense of the shift. We are all Rebbe. We can all be Rebbe if we get along with each other. So there's so many wonderful things about stories, and I want to see, looking at my list, what I'm going to skip. Let me say something about another thing that normally happens when people sit in the Beit HaMidrash and tell stories. Reb Shneor Zalman once was asked by his Hasidim, what would he tell them is the best way to live? And Reb Shneor Zalman answered his Hasidim, he said, you got to live with the times. Rebbe said, you got to live with the times. Madam, you know. How could the Rebbe say such a thing? So they went to ask the Rebbe's son, what did the Rebbe mean when he said, you got to live with the times? Ah, said Reb Dov Ber, his son. He meant you have to live with the Seder of the week, with the Torah portion of the week. You get that sense? Living with the times meant to live the liturgical calendar. When it's the time for Abraham and Isaac, you know, there is drama in the air during that week. There is something recurring week after week and year after year, as the cyclical way of time goes, that a certain note gets played out at the yard site, at the recurring moment during the year. So, what is today? Today was the 7th day of Adar. The 7th day of Adar is the birthday and the yard site of Moses, our teacher. Oh, can you imagine how many stories there are to be told about Moshe Rabbeinu, how he was born, what his life was, what his temptations were. That wonderful story about Moshe Rabbeinu. The king heard how wonderful this man is. He redeemed the Jews, and he's so wise and so good. So he sent someone, an artist, to paint his portrait. He came to Moshe Rabbeinu and painted his portrait, brought it back to the king. The king sees the portrait and says, wow. Oy, this person, a murderer, a robber, immoral human being. That is Moses? And the artist says, Your Majesty, I just painted what I saw. Whereupon the king sent a philosopher. Go talk to him. And the philosopher came and he said, oh, what wisdom, what goodness. He says, did he look like that? Showed him the portrait. And he says, yes. He says, I gotta go talk to myself. So he travels to see Moshe Rabbeinu and looks, yeah, that's the portrait. Talks to him, the philosopher is right. So he says to him, tell me, I see what you look like, and I have a certain amount of wisdom and knowledge about Chochmat HaPartzuf, physiognomy. I can look at a face and I can discern something. This is your face, and these are the things I see. And yet I see how wise and how good you are. How come I see these ugly things? And Moshe Rabbeinu said, what you see is right. I came in with those tendencies, and that's been my work all the time. So, you hear stories told. So one of the things that we talk about is Moshe Rabbeinu's birth. When he was born, the whole room was filled with light. You get that sense of light, bringing light, yes? How wonderful that is. And then the time comes for Moses to die, and he doesn't want to die by the hands of the angel of death. And finally the Shekhinah herself has to come and tell him how to die. And as you read this in the Midrash today, it sounds so much like someone saying, lie down, relax, let go of limb and limb, fold your arms over your chest, close your eyes and try to look to the center of your head. That's how the Midrash puts it. One eye kukelt die Bronzweiten. So, and here he is doing that. and the last breath out is a kiss of the Shekhinah. And that's how he dies. Wonderful description of that. So you see, as people tell these stories, something happens. We get involved in that, and we start thinking about such thoughts that we don't dare to think usually. How would I like to die when my time comes? You know? And the story opens the gate that we can consider things that otherwise our anxiety wouldn't permit. Sometimes the stories are sharp. They give such a dig. One man comes to Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek and says, Rebbe, in my shtibel, I work so hard for everything, to keep it together, to make sure that there will be candles there for lights, and that the oven would be hot, and that things should be clean, and so on and so forth. And everybody in the shtibel steps on me. And the Rebbe says, who asked you to spread yourself all over the shtibel, so wherever one steps, they must step on you? You get that? It's like a gestalt flip, yeah? That the Rebbe takes that person in and makes him see something that they couldn't see before. Sometimes the stories that are told are so wonderful because they talk about a kind of direct perception, you know? Most of us are so hypnotized by opinions. You know, everybody says that, you know, the general opinion is this or that. What makes a Rebbe special is that he transcends going by opinion. And here's a wonderful story about that. The Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek, he was a grandson of Reb Shneur Zalman of Ladi, was not only a great Kabbalist, but he also dealt a lot with different halachic matters. And sometimes there were some very difficult things that you had to deal with. Tragedies because people were yoked to each other by law, as in the case of the Levirate law. The Levirate law says like this. Man marries a woman, dies without children. He has brothers. The rule is that the brother of the deceased is to marry the woman, and that child is to carry on the heritage of the one who died. Now, what happens if they really don't fit together? They have to undergo a ceremony of chalitza, or the untying of the shoe, and it's a heavy, heavy thing, and it's a degrading thing to both sides. It's terrible. But that's the rule, and it started out at one time because it had a good intent. The intent in a tribal situation was very, very clear. You want to keep the fields, the possessions within the tribe. We don't live in the same kind of a world anymore, and so that creates problems. Can you imagine if the person who is the brother of the deceased is either unwilling to do that, or worse than that, not compos mentis? He's crazy. And if somebody is crazy, they cannot act to release the woman. So what are they going to do? So this woman was traveling from rabbi to rabbi, asking, is there something you can do to help me so that I might be released from that Michiganer? And they took that Michiganer in chains along with them. And he went berserk every time. It was really, really terrible. So can you imagine, this woman is chained to this man. She can't get married to anybody else. And what's she going to do? So she comes to the first Rov, and he sits and tries and looks at all the sources, and there's nothing he can do for her. He writes a big opinion. gives it to her and said, I suggest you go to Rabbi so-and-so. He often finds an easier way. Maybe he can help you. And she travels there and says, Gornisht, and he sends her to Rabbi so-and-so, who also can't help, until finally they say to her, you go to the Tzemach Tzedek, to Reb Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the first of Lubavitch. So she gets there, and the secretary takes her into the Rebbe, and she gives all these opinions, and he takes a look at the opinions, puts them down on the table, and says, and where is the crazy one? Rebbe, you don't want to see him. He says, I can't deal with this case unless I see him. Please bring him. They bring him. Reb Mendel says, take off the chains. Rebbe, you don't know what you're talking about. This guy's going to go berserk. He's going to hit you. You can't do that. And he says, take off the chains. They take off the chains. They go out of the room. And the Tzemach Tzedek says, what's your name? He says, none of your damn business. He says, you're right, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Menachem Mendel. He says, you're Mendel, I'm Moshe. So he says, Moshe, you have a hard time with those chains. Oh, he says, terrible, terrible. They don't give me anything. Oh, do I crave to have a smoke. The Rebbe says, how wonderful. You know what? I too would like to have a smoke. I have a couple of pipes. Let's see, we're going to fill them up, and we're going to have a smoke. Takes out a pouch from the pocket. It's empty. He takes a tabik pishkele. You know what a tabik pishkele is? A snuff box. Takes out. It's empty. Oh, he says, I want to give you at least a pinch of snuff. I don't have it. See, I'm supposed to be a big rabbi and all that stuff, and they don't even give me tobacco to smoke or a pinch of snuff. You know what, Moshe? Here is a ruble. Go to the market and buy for 20 kopecks tobacco and for 5 kopecks snuff. Then bring it here and bring me change, and we're going to sit down and we're going to enjoy a smoke. I'm not going to walk out this door. He says, I'll go through the window. He goes out through the window, goes to the marketplace, buys the tobacco, counts out the change to the rabbi. The two of them are sitting down to smoke. They have a pinch of snuff. And the Rebbe says to him, how would you like to get rid of this woman? Oh, he says, Mendel, if you could do this for me. And the Rebbe tells him what he must do, and he does it. The woman is freed. She comes to the Rebbe, and she asks the Rebbe to add now finally the opinion by which he made the ceremony happen. And the Rebbe just wrote on the bottom and says, someone who can go to the market and get change and do the right thing in buying is not crazy in relation to doing what he must do. You see, Chassidim tell the story to show that a Rebbe isn't only doing stuff in heaven. Sometimes our little common sense makes the difference. While you deal with that issue of common sense, there's the thing about not to get too mystical. You know, when people get into this business of, did you hear about those Sefirot, you know, and the Kabbalah, you know, and you get into the mysticism, and you get all this kind of stuff, and people begin to talk about it like they have special knowledge, and then you ask, what does it mean? And they look with disdain. Well, if you don't know what the Sefirot are, what the Partsufim are, how the Nitzotzot operate, and all that stuff, it's no point talking to you. Right? So here is a story that I heard when I was in the yeshiva, when they were trying to teach me not to be a mystic. So here's a story. There was a young chassid by the name of Reb Shmuel Munkes. Reb Shmuel Munkes, he lived Chassidus. There was one time that Reb Shmuel Munkes tied himself on the stick that was the flag stick over the Rebbe's house with a gartel with a sash. The Rebbe came by and said, Shmuel, what are you doing up there? So he says, Rebbe, Bam Taylor, there is a scissor hanging. What should be hanging by a Rebbe? A chassid. So Shmuel Munkes was sort of a toughie. But so he makes his way, he's going to visit the Rebbe, and as he's walking, to the Rebbe you don't ride, to the Rebbe you walk, because every step creates merit, and every step gives you a chance to do the pilgrimage deeper and deeper. And so he sings to himself a song and reminisces what he experienced with the Rebbe the last time, and he's walking down the street, cloppity, 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 clop. There's a wagon coming down. There's a guy sitting in the wagon, sort of dressed like a dandy, knocks with a silver cane on the window of his carrete, of his chariot, and says, young man, whither? And he says, to Lyozhny. Oh, he said, what a coincidence. I also happen to go to Lyozhny. Why don't you come in, we'll share the ride together, and we'll talk a little Torah. And so, of course, who can refuse talking a little Torah too? So he goes in to the wagon, and he asks this man, the dandy, why are you going to Lyozhny? What do you expect? He says, I heard there's this new Rebbe there, Reb Zalman. And you see, my grandfather was a Kabbalist up to here. My father wasn't so great anymore, he was up to here. I'm a Kabbalist up to here, but up to here is also deep, very profound. And I heard that he's a Kabbalist, so I want to go and test him and see whether he really is a Kabbalist. Says Reb Shmuel to him, how remarkable. A Kabbalist up to here, the son of a Kabbalist up to here, the grandson of a Kabbalist up to here. Oh, he says, I saw this amazing text, and I found it in a holy book, in between the pages somebody had written, and here is what it said. In the beginning, it was all separate and sundered, and then it came together. And it spread itself wider and wider. And lines appeared and crisscrossed the field of that space. Dots were in the center of the small squares of space, enfolding that dot. And through the agency of the angel of fire, and the angel of water, it all came out well. He says, an amazing text. No, is it Zoharic? No, it's much later than the Zohar, this text. Is it Lurianic? No, it's a little earlier than Lurianic. And in his mind, he does a CD-ROM search, for this text, and can't find it. He says, young man, this is a good one to ask him. When I come to Lyozhny, I'm going to propose this to him, and then I'm going to really see whether he's a Kabbalist, because the text sounds to me really authentic. Now let's repeat it again. And on the Salzen gewinnen wir so eine Freude, und es ist Sprechen ganz und die Kappen der Guten, das auch ein Gebäude, normale, also really geht. Once again. And so they repeat it a couple of times, and now he has it down really fine. And because he travels in a chariot, and is sort of a person who is a Kabbalist up to here, son of a Kabbalist up to here, grandson of a Kabbalist up to here, they let him in to see the Rebbe soon. Shmuel Munkes still has to wait. Later on, when all the other Hasidim will have seen the Rebbe, they'll let Shmuel come in. So he comes in and he says, How do you do? I heard you're a Kabbalist. On the way up, I had the good fortune to be with a young man who proposed a text which he found in a book, and it said in the beginning everything was separated and sundered. And he repeats the text to him again. And how through the agency of the angel of fire and the angel of water it all came out well. And the Rebbe goes, He says, yes, I know. It's kreplach. In the beginning it was all separated and sundered, it was flour. And then it was put together, it was dough. And then it was rolled out in the field, crisscrossed and cutting, and a dot inside and folding over, and the angel of fire with the angel of water, and the temple and cooked. Kepler. And that's the antidote to getting so mystical that you talk about stuff that you don't have a notion about what it really is. Because every time when the Kabbalist does talk about something, he talks about a reality. And if only the words is what you catch and not the reality behind it, what's the point? I'm looking at the clock. We got time? Okay. So I'm going to take another shtickle, nice shtickle here. They're all screaming, me, tell me. Have you read Sogyal Rinpoche's book about death? The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. No, what can I do? These Jews are not in the lotus. So, he has wonderful stories about what happens to people in the transit between being in the body and then until they get ready for reincarnation, and all the ins and outs of what happens, and how there is contact between worlds too. And how the people on this side of life can help the people on the other side, and how the people on the other side can help the people on this side. And if you get notions of this kind of stuff, yeah, there are wonderful stories about that. But before I'm going to go to a story, my Bible is urging me to tell already. I want to say a few words. You know, enig keer bilang saga proverta. So, I had such an occasion in my experience where my mother, Alea Shalom, my brother, my two sisters, and I went to see the current Belzer Rebbe in Jerusalem. Now, I come from card-carrying Lubavitchers, you know, but Papa was a Belzer, and it was the year after the yahrzeit, after he had passed on. So we went to see the Belzer Rebbe for a blessing for my mother and for Don, and so we did it. As he read down the list of things, and he inquired about our life and wanted to know this and had an opinion about that. So all these things were happening. I want to tell you something. It was nice. I saw a Rebbe doing his job, doing a good job. Didn't touch me. Then he came to read my father's name on the kvittel, which is the billet that you hand the Rebbe, where he reads what you want him to respond to in prayer and in blessing and this, and he came to see Papa's yahrzeit today. And he went like this. Ist schon seins übergekommen. To translate, he's already past the troubling stuff. You know, and can you imagine how that touched me? That there would be, you know, we always worry about such things. To whom do you go if you want to see a medium, you know? You don't tell it to another Jew. They might tell the rabbi, you went to see a medium, it's a no-no. So, but we're all curious, right? And we wouldn't mind knowing a little bit, was tut sich auf jener Welt, you know, and how it goes with our relatives who are there and so on. But can you imagine, for him, for the Belzer Rebbe, this was it was all in the day's work for him to check out what happened to a chassid who had died a year before, and to see he's okay, you know, he's already done his stuff. So when there were stories that would come like this, once there was a woman and she was very poor, and her husband died, and she didn't have any children. Oh, she wanted to say Kaddish. It was before egalitarianism. So she couldn't go and say Kaddish in shul. So she went and took in an extra load of laundry so that she would do that work and take that money to the shamas and ask the shamas to say a Kaddish. And somehow she felt that this was right. And after a while, she felt that there must be so many people who no one says Kaddish for. So she worked still harder and got together another couple of coins and said to the person, would you say another Kaddish for someone who has no one to say Kaddish for? And he said yes. One day she needed to pay the rent. She didn't have money to pay the rent, and she was really in tzuras, and so she's walking down the road a little bit, and she is saying, dear God, I could use some help. When a carriage comes by, and a man, well-dressed, noble-looking, invites her to sit in the carriage and says, why are you so troubled? What's going on? And she tells him of her sorrows, of her travail. And he takes out a vexel. A vexel is the old way in which he said a check, you know. A note to the banker saying, pay to this woman 10,000 rubles. She didn't need that much. But she took that note and came there to the bank and presented it to the teller. The teller says, it's a big note, something that I can't handle, I gotta go to a higher up. Who sees the note and says, we gotta go to a higher up. Who finally says, no, the president of the bank has to handle this one, we can't handle that. And they usher her in to see the president of the bank. And he says, where did you get that note? And she looks around the room, and there were pictures of portraits of people. And she points to a portrait and says, this man, this is the man who gave me the note. The banker nearly faints. It's been 8 years that his father, whose picture was there, has died. And he hadn't said Kaddish for his father. So this woman who had hired with her hard work someone to say Kaddish for someone who needed a Kaddish helped that banker, and so she got helped in turn. People come back from the other side, and so many of these stories, a bride who has been jilted comes back and tells her chosn then, who now cannot have any children, that he will not have any children until she forgives him, and she won't forgive him until he will help her poor brother in that shtetl and give him so and so much money. So do you see? Yeah, he comes to the brother and says, here, I'm doing this. And he says, It was I met my fiancée in that marketplace, so-and-so, and she told me that I have to go. She won't forgive me. He says, what are you talking about? She died so many years ago, you know. So that, you hear that, those questions about those who come from the other side and those who go there. Another one of those wonderfully awesome ones. Yes?
Tell me about the mirrors of the Shiva.
Good. Many people think that the reason why we cover the mirror at the Shiva is so that the people who are the grieving people shouldn't get into vanity. And that's a nice interpretation that fits for low ceilings. But if you go into our literature, the description goes as follows. A soul passing out of the body becomes a ro'eh ve'eno nireh, one who sees and who himself is invisible. In order to save the soul the shock of seeing itself not reflected in the mirror when everything else is reflected in the mirror. Could you imagine what that would feel like? Stand in front of a mirror and see everything but yourself. That kind of ego-crushing thing that would be. So until they get used to it a little bit, you know, to be without a body and to attune themselves to other things, we keep the mirrors covered. So stories, you know, we lived with that understanding of reality, and the stories come around as a result of that. A woman had two of her children die from this kind of sudden crib death. She comes to the Koženitzer Rebbe and says, Holy Master, why should it be that I should carry a child under my heart for 9 months and raise a child for a couple of years, and a child should die? Should God do this to a mother? Please, Rebbe, give me a blessing that I will conceive and I will see my child grow up. And the Rebbe says, the Rebbe wird helfen, you'll have a child. You'll see the child grow up. Don't worry. And now she bears a child, and the child is about 2 years old, and she sits near the crib, and the child seems to go and to fail. She runs to the Rebbe and said, Rebbe, you promised, like this can't happen again. And the Rebbe said to her, it won't. Go back, stay near the crib, and you will see. And suddenly, as she is near the crib, there, standing in the uniform of a Russian soldier, a man bends over the crib, takes out a bottle from the pocket and a spoon from the other, pours a little bit in the spoon, feeds it to the child, and she is scared because the man vanishes into thin air in front of her eyes. She runs to the Rebbe and said, Rebbe, what was all this about? He says, don't worry, they sent him. They sent him. All right, it's time to help him, the Rebbe says. And the child grows up and everything's fine, but the day afterwards, the Rebbe takes his staff, this is a bit like Moses' staff, and says to his gabbai, go to the cemetery. There is this unmarked grave at the edge of the cemetery, and I want you to beat with that staff 3 times on the grave and say, Holy soul of the one buried here, you're summoned to come to the Rebbe tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and a suitable burial will be set up for you so that you can appear. And in the corner of the Rebbe's house, they spread a sheet, and at 9 o'clock, it gets cold in the room, and a voice is heard, you sent for me. Yes, the Rebbe said, I did. Tell me, who made you for a doctor? And he said, Rebbe, I was a cantonist. One of the children that the chappers came to steal away from families to bring to the Russian army because they had a certain quota of Jewish boys that had to be inducted. So when I was a child, I was inducted into the army that way, gechapt from my parents, and I grew up in the army. One day, my platoon is making its way, and as my platoon is making its way, there is this Yiddish coming, and he has a barrel, a little cask, on his wagon, and he's coming through a clearing, and the soldiers fall on him, and soon take a rope and hang him, and take the cask and the wagon off to another clearing, where they open the cask and begin to drink, and I make as if I'm joining them. And when I see they're drunk enough that I can disappear, I run back to the clearing, and the man is not yet dead. He has been holding himself by the rope. I cut him down, and I say to him, "Run, run, Rabbi, run, run." And he ran off. But in the meantime, my comrades saw that I wasn't there, came to the clearing, saw that I had cut him down, and were afraid that I might tell on them, hung me on that rope, and this time made sure that I was dead. So I came to the other world, and there the judgment comes. And what can they say bad about me? I've been longing so much to live in a Jewish situation, and here I had to be a soldier. The only thing that I could do was to save that person's life, and I did that. And so they said, he surely doesn't have to go to purgatory, to Gehenna. He deserves to go to heaven. And they sent me to heaven. But you know what? I had no learning. And up there in heaven, oh yeah, they're busy with learning. They're doing all kinds, and I don't understand. And I look in their faces, and I see, each one is saying, you know, they're so excited by what they're learning, and I don't understand. So I asked them, that's not a good place for me. So they said, I'll tell you what, since you're good at life-saving, we're going to send you around, and wherever it is decreed that somebody who is sick should get better, we're going to give you a bottle of Samachayim, the medicine of life, and you're going to go and give a spoon of Samachayim, and the person is going to live. And that's what I've been doing. So the Rebbe says to him, tell me, would you like to continue that? He says, I've done it for a while already. Would you mind? I'd like to understand what's going on, where these guys are sitting around and learning Torah. So the Rebbe says, all right, I'll pray for you to be reincarnated. And the next time a woman came to say, Rebbe, I would like to conceive, he says, will you teach him Torah? And then the Rebbe promised, and that soul by this time is already sitting there again and enjoying with all the others. So, see that feeling? Right? That's naches. The Yiddish word naches has that feeling when you can say, good, you know, when a tension is gone and when there's a deep relaxation and a joy coming. There are some other things I'd like to share with you that I don't get a chance most of the time to share with people. They have to do with the art that goes in storytelling. When you sit with Hasidim and you want to say, I want to read you now something that Menachem Baraisha wrote. Any of you ever heard of him, Menachem Baraisha? A Yiddish poet who wrote a remarkable novel in verse. And depending on what he is describing, the rhythms in Yiddish come in like this, you know. He's talking about a kid, a Cheder Yingel, you know. So he says, Cheder Yingel spielen sich in sich zusammen. You get that? The rhythm in the melody that he puts into the poetry is wonderful. And the whole thing is called der Geher, the one who walks. And it's based on a teaching by Rabbi Zalman, who says that angels stand, as it is written, Raglehem regel yeshara. Their foot is a straight foot. An angel always stands in one place, doesn't change. But a human being walks, aruf and aruf, aruf and aruf, aruf and aruf, always up and down as you're walking. So he is calling a human being a geher, okay? That whole book of verse novel is about how this young man is a chassid and finally goes on a pilgrimage, winds up in Israel after all that stuff that comes to the end of last century. In there, he has a description, a ballad, and I'd like to read you this ballad. It's my translation of his Yiddish, so you get a sense of another story that is telling you how to do Kabbalah right, okay? A shtetl, far from the highway. A shtetl, Jews, peasants do business with the village, work for the farmers, and in his room, the door locked, the rabbi studies, and the books on his shelves multiply. He makes his way to town, finds a holy book, the seller names a price. Weeks of wages. I'll be back. And the rabbi goes out to borrow the money. Too late. The bookseller cuts him off. It's sold. Some coachman bought it. A balagula. A coachman. A balagula. A book about Kabbalah. Ah. The rabbi, not knowing if the dealer teases, walks into the slum streets and asks for the balagula who buys books. They just stare at him. The last one on his list boards at the shoe patcher. The rabbi gets his shoes patched. He asks, "What's in these books you buy?" "Ah," the balagola replies, "Mises, stories." The rabbi, his suspicions confirmed, says, "Yeah, I could have guessed as much. Imagine balagulas and books on Kabbalah." His heart, brined and salt, disgusted by the loss of the book, and the bookseller's teasing he wants only to travel home, so he goes to the market to find the right, ready to go. The balagula yells, "Hop in, let's move." Amazed, the rabbi wonders, only one fare and he travels. You know, balagulas would wait to fill a wagon before they would travel, and he takes them along. "Come up, rabbi, don't worry." The balagula high on the driver's seat, the rabbi under the covered wagon's hood, they travel. Only an hour or two, he thinks, and I'll be home. But soon he feels a halt, and looking out, he hears the balagola say, "Come, crawl out and look at this." The rabbi crawls, looks, can't even recognize the road. "Is this not a strange road?" he asks. "It'll get to be our own. Look." And he points to a field where there are peasants barefoot, scythes in hand, cutting hay, fragrant hay, rolling fields, vaulted sky, birds swarm swooping overhead. "I see nothing," says the rabbi. "Okay, we'll keep trucking." Hours pass. Suddenly another stop. "Come on out, rabbi." This time even more alien. A field and forest, and the balagola stops to chat with a village peddler. "Why drag me around?" The rabbi is angry. The balagola just says, "This fellow can use a ride. Move over and we'll take him a spell." The wagon moves, the peddler and the rabbi sitting under the hood, and the rabbi's silence, breeze, icy anger. So the peddler keeps his peace and they move on. Another stop. An akuzhnya, a smithy. And some strange shtetl, the peddler leaves, moving on his way. The balagola waits in the kuzhnya for the koval, the smith, to come and shoe the horse. He calls outside to the rabbi, "Come on in, it's happier here." At the door of the smithy stands the rabbi, growling with anger. "What impertinence! All I need is to overhear the conversations between kovals and balagulas." Finally, they travel on. But soon oats are needed for the horse, so on to the feed store. In friendly conversation stands the storekeeper, the balagola, and a woman. The rabbi burns with rage. When will there be an end to this? The balagola looks at him. It's a good store. Good folks here. Why don't you come in? The rabbi bites his lips. Even exile will someday find its end. Oy, you need shine. Night falls. They drive up to a kretschmer, a roadhouse. As the balagola unhitches the horse, the rabbi starts to go, trying to find his colleague in the shtetl. But he is stopped. You'll find good people in the roadhouse too. That chutzpah of the balagola imprisons him, and he stays. The kretschmer is filled with simple folk, eating, drinking, smoking. He finds a corner, prays the evening prayer, and lets himself be served supper, while the kretschmer and the balagola hum. Tired of his anger, he naps and knows not when the lamps are doused and when the night got lost. The day grays to dawn, and the balagola shakes him awake. He wants to wash his hands for prayer. The other one rushes in. You'll daven at home. Now the wagon flies. The road looks familiar. The sun is fully up. They're at the rabbi's house. Rabbi arrived. Feeling fortunate, at home at last, he reaches for his wallet. How much do I owe you? He asks. You owe me nothing. The answer comes. I'll even pay you. And he pulls out the book and gives it to the rabbi. Take it, Rabbi. If you see nothing, hear nothing, the book won't help you either. He turns to his horse and urges him on with, Yo! The rabbi stands there confused. He rushes to pursue the wagon, but the balagola is way gone. You get the sense of what is the use of that learning that isn't experienced from within. I'm torn between one more story, which I'm very eager to share with you, and spending time with questions and answers.
Oh, story.
Story first. Okay. You'll have to listen again, because I want to read this one. It's a story that touches me deeply. It's from this book, A Dream Assembly. Do you know the name Howard Schwartz?
Yes.
Okay. Howard and I collaborated in this book. And these were things that happened to me. But since Howard likes to write stories as if they happened to people years and years ago, so he wrote about this Rabbi Zalman who lived in Zholkiv 150 years ago. Okay? So here is one of those stories. I'll tell you the title of it at the end. Rabbi Zalman called Reb Shmuel Leib and Feivel the Dark and Feivel the Light and asked him to form a bet din, a court of law. Reb Sholem and Reb Chaim Elia were to serve as scribes of the court. 3 and a 2. Chaim Elia, by the way, is the name of Howard Schwartz. Okay. Here then were the proceedings, as Reb Chaim Elia recalled them. Reb Zalman sighed with a heavy heart and said that he wished the bet din to meet after the morning prayer to hear a dream of his and to perform the ritual of Hatavat Chalom, in which a dream is interpreted, ameliorated. Once the bet din had been constituted, Reb Zalman stood before them, and Reb Shmuel Leib, speaking for the court, said, all interpretations are of God. Please tell us your dream. That's the ritual that you say. And Reb Zalman said 3 times, I saw a dream, I saw a dream, I saw a dream. May it be for good. And Reb Shmuel Leib replied, the dream you have seen is good, and good it may be. May the merciful make it turn out for the good. 7 times shall it be decreed from heaven, it should be good, and good it shall be. How do you say that in Yiddish? Sollst auslegen zu guten. Take the dream and put it down for goodness. Try and find every good point in it. Then Rabbi Zalman began to recite the words of the psalm. Hafachta mispidar mochali, you have turned my sackcloth into dancing. And after this, he related his dream, and he said, I felt my time had come. The Chevra Kadisha surrounding my bed. I said the vidui, the confession, and was ready to invite the Malach HaMoves, the angel of death, to do his work quickly. Utilizing every name of God I had learned, I effected the unification and saw myself plunged into a torrent of white light before Duma, the angel of the grave, had a chance to interrupt me and ask me his questions. For I wished nothing else but to be drawn into the very body of the one who is the source of all blessing. Like a drop merging with the ocean, I wished to be assimilated in Ein Sof, in the infinite. Wave after wave of swirls interrupted the mikveh in the river of light. Each time my head bobbed up from that river, I saw another image. Sometimes it seemed to be that all of humanity was actually connected. And what would seem to us to be the upper part of a person, that which stands out and makes him look separate, was only an appendage of that one being which we are all underneath the surface. I saw myself from time to time rousing the somnolent parts of myself. Some of them woke up with smiles, some of them woke up startled, and others were angry and cursed me for having woken them from the long sleep, because they wished to stay in their separateness. And responding to their anger, I found myself getting angry as well. And only the next wave of the river of light washed away my anger and carried me out to the sea. And then came another wave. As I emerged from the river, every good deed I'd ever done in my life surrounded me, tempting me with pride. And I didn't know what to do with them. But suddenly I saw Melchizedek, the king of Salem, the high priest, on high. And I said to him, please take my mitzvahs, offer them up. They're not for me, but for the Holy One, blessed be he. And Melchizedek lifted up the mitzvah, and he lifted me up as well. And there, as he lifted me very high, the river of light bathed my soul once again. All during that time I heard a surging sound of the bat call, the heavenly voice, although I couldn't make the words out. But by this time I was about to plunge again into the next wave of the river of light. I heard it, but not very clearly. The voice said, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? This time my mind did not merge with the river of light. So painful was the cry of the Shekhinah with those words. And before I knew it, I cried out hoarsely, I will go. I followed the sound I heard, trying to reach its source, and before long I found myself in a vale of tears, smokestacks with blue smoke curling up to heaven in my father's town of Auschwitz. Countless people were crying out Shema Yisrael as the last outcry. And all the while the Shekhinah was wailing and wailing, but the Omnipotent One did not give her any power to stop what was happening. Again I cried out, I will go, thinking I was to join the martyrs. In the next wave, the Shekhinah repeated her question with urgent clarity, and this time I responded with a clear voice. I was carried still further into the future and saw a country in which there were many Jews who made their home there. And in that country, there were Jews who received any Torah, if they received it at all. It was only the outer trappings of Yiddishkeit and none of its inner joys. And my soul was attracted to go there. And there I saw myself studying in the yeshiva, where joy and the power of Torah had not been lost, and with others who had responded to the call. And I kept looking for that which was lacking in all of that country. And then I found myself faced with an awakening in which I saw the river of light once more, and my path to which I'd become pledged, running beside it. And I started to look for a way in which I could fulfill the task that I had undertaken. And that path led me to a Beit HaMidrash. And the Beit HaMidrash was filled with books. And wherever I went, I saw books, and I picked up the books. And each one of those books was a book of how to be a tzaddik in a different time in history. I saw how to be a tzaddik in the time of the Talmud of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, of Reb Pinchas ben Yair. I saw how to be a tzaddik in the time of the medieval period, Yehuda HaChassid. I saw how to be a tzaddik in the time of the Ariya Kodesh and the sacred disciples in Tzfat, and in the time of the Baal Shem Tov. And in the volume of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the letters were still dancing. And then I came upon a book on how to be a tzaddik in my own time, and I opened it. And I found, to my horror, that it was blank. There was no script. Then I called out and said, Ribono Shel Olam, I volunteered and I said I would come and serve, but I do not know how to serve you in this century. So much has changed. So few of the things that were guidelines in the past can be of help to me today. But there was only silence. And at that I felt in great terror and I began to cry. I began to count all the books on the shelves, and as I counted them, there were 620 of them, one for the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah and the 7 of the rabbis. And I opened up each and every one of those books and searched for the ways, but none of them held the script that I was searching for. At last I came back to the blank book and I studied it more closely. And I discovered the one thing that was written on it, my name. And I realized that I myself would have to inscribe the pages of the book open before me. And I looked for a quill and ink, but learned that each page had to be written by a mixture of tears, sweat and blood mixed with black bile. Melancholia. Then I began to cry and to sweat, and I pierced my finger for blood and began to write, but I discovered that if the ingredient of joy was missing, the letters would soon fade and the page would become blank again. That is how I learned that I had to add joy to that mixture, for only then it would be permanent. Just then, Reb Zalman stopped speaking and looked up and found himself standing in front of the Bet Din. And he was silent for a long time. But at last he said, "Now tell me, will the letters I write in that book lead me to Gan Eden, to paradise, or to Gehenna? Will I be able to fulfill that for which I offered my soul, or will I in my eagerness drag myself and those who follow me into the abyss?" And when Reb Zalman said this, the members of the Bet Din realized how complex was the matter and how heavy the weight of their decision, and they consulted together in whispers for a very long time. But they couldn't reach a conclusion. Therefore, they asked the 2 scribes, Reb Chaim Elia and Reb Sholem, to join them. And they continued to consult for another 2 hours, until 3 hours had passed, and all the time Reb Zalman stood before them, his head sunk on his chest, and it seemed to him that his soul hung in the balance by a slender thread. At last, the Bet Din came to a decision, and Reb Shmuel Leib spoke for the court and said, "As to where the path you have taken will lead you, we are unable to say. All we can tell you is this: it is clearly destined that you will live until you have finished inscribing every page of that book. May the one who gives peace to those who are far and near guard you well until that day, and guard your soul in the days that follow." At that point, they all started to chant the Hatavat Chalom, and Reb Zalman went to daven, singing Hallelujah, with a strange melody and a strange rhythm, which none of the Hasidim had ever heard before.
I like the ending.
So,
The title of the story?
a tzaddik in search of script.
That had been search of the story.
Did I see a hand? No, have pity, my hand. Somebody, please.
You talked before about the winnow Jews and the lotus. And I just finished reading Roger Cannon's book very lovingly talks about you and describes your trip to visit the Dalai Lama. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Will you repeat the question?
Yeah, I just am reading, or have read, The Jew and the Lotus by Roger Kamenetz, which is a description of a trip that a number of Jews took to go to Dharamsala to be with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and to consult with him on issues that he found of interest. And well, there's a history to that. You see, in '59 it was, when Tibet was overrun by the Chinese, that I sent a wire to Ben Gurion suggesting that as the Dalai Lama was fleeing, that they should offer him sanctuary in Israel. Not much was done at that time. Then I used to come in from Manitoba to visit in New York, and a friend of mine who was teaching some lamas who had arrived in the United States and lived in New Jersey suggested that I come along with him and meet them. Well, I was excited and went down to close to Highland Park. They had a monastery there, and I met an old geisha. A geisha is a, how should you say, a professor of their wisdom. He was teaching at Columbia, and we started a conversation, and he served tea and apologized that he didn't have any yak butter to put inside. That a breakstone would have to do it. Did you ever have tea with salt and butter? Okay, so that's what we had. And we had a conversation, and I mentioned to him the thing of, now that they have to survive without a homeland, there are some things that we Jews might be able to help them with. We have long experience with that. And so he mediated that, and it took a long time until they could be free enough to get to raise that. And the Dalai Lama was in New York, and there was at that same place in New Jersey was a meeting between him and a group of rabbis, and it was then decided that it wasn't enough for him to get to meet us. It was important for his people to get to meet us too, that this wasn't a connection that just he would maintain. It was important that we meet face to face. So he invited a group of people. And Baruch Hashem, it was wonderful. We had two very articulate women with us, and one being a Reconstructionist rabbi. So get that, you know, it's a very entrenched kind of hierarchy there. And to bring her in and to share in the same way and in the conversations that we had. And he was delighted by this whole business. When we were preparing to go, I read up a little bit on Tibetan history and saw some pictures of Tibetan nobles. And they wore streimlach and kapotes, fur hats, you know, and the long coats. So I decided that for that occasion, I should take along my streimel and my kapote, which I hadn't worn for quite a while. And so it was a wonderful trip. On the way, you know, you're driving along the landscape in India, and the highway is sort of a two-laner, you know, with potholes and all that geschäften. But as many filling stations as you have in the United States, you have temples on that side of the road, and was getting to time to daven mincha. So I asked our driver to stop at the nearest temple, which turned out to be a Sikh temple. And we went in, took off our shoes, and davened mincha there. And promptly were invited to tea by the head priest who was there at that temple. We had a wonderful exchange. So it was a miraculous journey. what was most important at the end was the meetings that we had with His Holiness and the meetings that we had with some of his younger lamas, who then wanted to find out, how do you do it, you know? And we talked about summer camps. And we made sure that they should have an opportunity to visit Jewish summer camps and to see what was happening. And they have done that. And you can imagine, how many of you have been to a Jewish summer camp? Well, I want to tell you something. That experience has made us. It's at the time when we had to separate from parents and find our own values, you know, and we had our own ideals, and if somebody grabbed us by the heart at that time, how wonderful it was to do that. And being far away from their country, to give them that kind of vision, you know, that they could get in a summer camp when they come together was wonderful. Well, that's a sort of a short thing. That's been a long day for me, and it's time to say good night.
That's great. Thank you so much. I want to remind you about the books and tapes, if you want to take Reb Zalman home. If you are also interested in pursuing Pnei Or and Jewish renewal, there's a new hotline, 751-9642, and I believe information over on the counter about the Pnei Or Havara that is being organized or is already organized in New York City. So by all means ask them and look on the counter for information. And please join us in the Children's Library for refreshments. Thank you very much for coming this evening. Thank you, Reb Zalman, for a wonderful
You got your $10?
Yes,
She wouldn't give them to me. I said, oh, yeah, I know. I couldn't remember. I had this vision of you in color, but I couldn't quite remember.
It's so sad listening to him because I'm missing my friend Lucy. Lucy was a great storyteller.
For information about Jewish Renewal, please contact Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal, at 7318 Germantown Avenue, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 19119. For Jewish Renewal events in New York City, please call the Pnei Or New York hotline at 212-751-YOGA. That's 212-751-9642. Narration and executive producer, Kay Abrahams. Video by Jack Lenchiner. Thank you, Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi, for your inspiration and teachings. This event was dedicated in memory of Reb Shlomo Carlebach. Shalom.